So, I mean, that's a key point, I guess, is that it's trade is something that's innately human.
Right.
We trade with one another.
Right.
Money emerges as the most tradable thing, basically.
Right.
It's not government created nor enforced.
It can be.
In a natural world.
In a natural world, it's not, right?
Yeah.
There is no government per se. Yeah.
So what took us across the chasm from, say, something like from a gold standard, wherever it may have emerged, to central planning of money?
Yeah, there are a lot of steps. I mean, the first one was fractional reserve gold through, gold lending houses and that whole thing, and that led to banking and fractional reserve banking. But recognizing that the risks inherent in all of that, there was always a gold backing to paper. I mean, the Chinese tried paper money, in the 4th and 5th century, and it failed miserably because they printed way too much of it. So, there were fiat experiments long ago. And there's a fiat experiment at the beginning of this country in the United States. I mean, the Continental was used to finance the Revolutionary War, and the saying it became worthless as a Continental is very well known, and that's because they had hyperinflation, which is, by the way, why in 1789, when they drafted the Constitution, it said only gold and silver could be money. I mean, they knew the risks of hyperinflation. So, so what happened then is we kind of evolved over time, right? I mean, the U.S. started off on a gold standard, and there was fractional reserve banking, and we slightly broke the gold standard with the greenback in the Civil War. We were interesting to note that, we have a war. How the hell are you going to pay for it, right? Well, Lincoln introduces greenbacks and prints them to pay for the war, and then they got depreciated substantially. And so, there are different clues that show you that, they were having a hard time maintaining a gold standard, but they more or less did it until the Federal Reserve came along. And the Federal Reserve, and so what you had is an era of free banking, an era of competing currencies, and at the base of it all was gold. I mean, and even J.P. Morgan, who was the titan financier of his day, said that gold is money, everything else is credit, and he was right. But what happened is that a lot of credit got built up because the banks got bigger and bigger, and so, but at the base of that all was gold. Exeter's pyramid, gold was at the bottom. I mean, today Bitcoin would be at the bottom, but what you're looking at is over time that all began to slip. And so in 1913, they created the central bank, which was really a cartel for the banks, to protect them and protect the lender of last resort. And, their charter was just to prevent bank panics. And there had been many throughout the 1800s. As you might imagine, people would mismanage a bank. They'd get out over their skis. The bank would fail. And there'd be a very sharp business contraction. But generally, it was quite quick, and it would resolve itself, and things would go on. I mean, if you look at the period of time from 1789 to 1913, I mean, that's probably the largest period of average growth in human standards in the history of the world. I mean, people, in the early 1700s, 1800s, we were agrarian dirt farmers. Yeah. And by 1913, we had a modern, semi-modern industrialized economy, and everyone's lifestyle had gone up enormously during that time frame. Yeah. And so, and we were on the gold standard the entire time. We didn't need a central bank. Yeah. We didn't need fiat money. The money was backed by gold. The banks were, sometimes not credit worthy. That was the fractional reserve problem. But, they set out and they established the Federal Reserve in 1913, and then 2 years into it, and they said they were only going to back against good credit for short periods of time at very high rates. And within 3 years, they broke that rule, and they printed money to finance World War I. And then they had a brief depression in 1920. And they didn't like that, and so they printed more money, and they created the 1929 bubble. And of course, that blew up because it was really egregious. People were able to borrow 90% of the value of a stock, and so they were kiting stocks to the moon. And when that blew up, we had the Great Depression. And unfortunately, the statists in our world interpreted the Great Depression in a manner that was favorable to them and gave them more power. Of course. They said it was the gold standard that caused it. Yeah. When in fact, what caused the Great Depression was the Federal Reserve and the excess credit that it allowed and encouraged to build post-World War I and during the 20s. And so if we, no boom, no bust, we had an enormous boom. And so as you might expect, we had an enormous bust. Yeah. And they said, oh, that's the gold standard. And of course, they grabbed the gold. They revalued the gold downward 70%. And it was a very long time recovering. And in fact, we had to really enter a war and slaughter 50 million people to recover. And the war was financed by money printing and financial repression. So the whole money printing thing is just a morally evil thing. I mean, it's, the Bible says this, the Constitution says this. I mean, if you have control of the monetary medium, you can control the populace. You can make yourself rich. I mean, Baron von Rothschild said it, famously. He said, give me control of the money. I don't care who makes the laws.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. I mean, we let a bunch of greedy bankers get control of our monetary system, and we've never gotten it back from them.
Mm-hmm.
And, therefore, average people make today what they made in 1971, and yet everything costs multiples more.
Yeah.
And they've squeezed the lower class, and they've created quintillionaires, the people at the top, who are just insanely rich, as a result of being able to shuffle paper.
Yeah,
it's pretty bad.
It's
it's really pretty bad, as you know.
Yeah,
as we all know, and that's why we're here, and that's why we're fighting it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way you put that, as like just shuffling papers. They're getting rich through confiscation ultimately, right? It's
they're taking 10% of everybody else's wealth every year.
Yeah.
It goes in their pocket. I mean, here's what I like to think. Think about all the productivity improvements we've had in the last 20, 30 years, the PC. I mean, just all the world has gotten so much more efficient. We can communicate with each other. We can, just the spreadsheet. I mean, we keep track of things. It's fabulous. I mean, what the PC, the internet, what the microprocessor revolution has done to the world is stunning.
Yes.
We all should be working 20 hours a week and be rich.
Right.
But in fact, what's happened is we're not. We're all working harder.
Yeah.
And it's because all the wealth has been skimmed off at the top.
Right.
Right?
Exactly. Right.
That's how, Jeff Bezos is worth $80 billion, or Steve Ballmer's worth $80 billion.
Yeah. Or,
Jamie Dimon is a billionaire for basically being a banker. I mean, it's because the distribution of the productivity gains has not been in anything close to being equal.
Right.
I mean, the 70s, a CEO would make 25 times what their average employee made. Now the average CEO makes 500 times what their average employee makes. It's ridiculous.
Staggering.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just upside down.
And that's the proper way to frame it. I often say that inflation is used to harvest the economic surplus.
Yes.
Right. And so, because it's a debt-based structure, like, you have to have inflation of the money supply to erode the debt.
Right. Well, that's the thing.
But that only works so long as there's real productivity growth. And we've had a lot of that through globalization, digitization.
Right.
But that comes to an end at some point, right? It's the parasite aggressing against the host.
A little bit. I mean, I'm not sure exactly totally where you're going there, but a little bit of it is that, look, we've got, and this is one of the great flaws in Keynesianism in my view, we've got a planet with a fixed amount of resource, fixed size. Now, we can get more efficient at using those resources, but we don't get another planet. This is it, right? And we're destroying it in some ways. The Keynesian notion that growth at any cost is always a good thing, it's just an incredibly broken and flawed notion. I mean, Jeff Booth is the best at pointing this out in his book. I mean, we don't need top line growth. We don't need higher prices. We don't need, quote unquote, more of everything. What we need is more for less, which is what deflation is. Yeah. And so the Keynesian model was built on an inflationary, concentrate all the power in a central authority. Just like we did in World War II, we had the central authority that was really good at killing 50 million people. Right? We need to decentralize, because I don't think there's anybody in the world that really wants to go kill a bunch of other people. Right? I mean, and yet we've still got central authorities playing these games where people are dying as a result of wars that shouldn't be fought. And, they're being fought because of the fake money.